Treloar?
Yes.
Okay, because I get
You're
that
just
wrong.
going to call me Treloar?
I usually say Treloar.
Can I call you Kinsella?
Yes, you can call me anything you want.
It's all last names.
They say Kinsella in the old country.
Is that right?
Well, you think about like these famous conferences, like Sun Valley. They become famous because
of the
that.
right.
Sun Valley, Davos, Chattanooga.
And now the mayor of Chattanooga is going to be using that clip.
Davos, Sun Valley,
Oh man,
Chattanooga.
He should have been mic'd.
Be there.
Okay, Bret Kinsella here at Project Voice in Chattanooga, and I have the rare opportunity to sit down with Nate Treloar from Orbita and Teri Fisher from Alexa in Canada and numerous other, we'll call it voice-first capabilities, voice in healthcare. He'll tell you all that. But I'm really happy to have everyone here today so that we can talk about healthcare voice assistants and where we're headed. Nate, why don't you start out, introduce yourself to the audience, tell them a little bit about your background and what Orbita does.
Sure. Nate Treloar. I'm president and co-founder of Orbita. We're a software company based up in Boston, and we work with the largest healthcare systems, payers, pharmas, and other providers to the healthcare industry to help them tap into the power and potential of voice around a variety of use cases, generally patient-facing, but our goal is to transform healthcare by closing those gaps in patient engagement across the whole care journey. So you have patients who are looking for care, in receipt of care, and then managing their own health. And one of the biggest challenges very generally in the healthcare industry is patients remaining engaged in their own care plans, being connected with their care team, their physicians, their care providers. And increasingly, the aging population is another big demographic that we care about. These voice assistants have a great potential to address a serious issue in this country, which is isolation and loneliness.
Right.
So we work across the industry. We are a service provider in the sense that we do not have any consumer offerings ourselves. We empower our clients, who are companies and organizations like the Mayo Clinic and Brigham and Women's Hospital and Cigna, to develop their own virtual assistant healthcare solutions. And we do that through our own technology, which is designed to layer on top of the big platforms from Alexa and Google, but also offers its own unique capabilities customized for the healthcare industry.
Perfect. Dr. Teri Fisher, practicing physician.
Correct.
Voice aficionado.
Thank you.
Pioneer in the space. Tell people about what you do and why you're doing this.
Yeah, so and you kind of summarized it right there. I like to say now that I'm a physician by day. I work out at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. Practice full-time doing family medicine, sports medicine. And then by night, I'm a voice enthusiast. And this all started for me a couple of years ago when I started to hear about voice technology. I've always been a little bit of a techie. Love all kinds of gadgets, and I started to explore what you can do with voice. At the time, there were not a lot of resources that I found that were really helpful to me, so I decided to create some of them. Some of my background is teaching as well. I love educating people about all the cool stuff that's going on. So my first sort of foray into voice was the Alexa in Canada blog and podcast, helping Canadians to learn.
Isn't that the #1 flash briefing in Canada too?
The flash briefing voice in
might as well
Canada
get credit
is
for it,
the
right?
#1. Thank you, Bret. Yeah. And so that was the beginning of it. And then I had people asking me, hey, you're a physician. What does voice have to do with your job? And I started to think about that. And as I started to realize the potential of voice in healthcare, again, I started to explore, look for resources that would help me to learn about that. And there wasn't a whole lot there either. So I started the Voice First Health podcast and blog. And that's probably more relevant to this discussion. And on that podcast, I interview people that are doing some of the most incredible work at that intersection of voice and healthcare, including Nate. Nate's been on there, and a lot of other great people in this space.
Got it. All right, so as a practicing physician, a lot of people know about voice technology being used in hospitals for dictation, right? So have you ever used those types of solutions in your practice where you're using some sort of speech-to-text capability to track that, or other types of things before you ran into Alexa?
Yeah, so certainly. I mean, the typical scenario for a lot of physicians right now is using things like Nuance as a text-to-speech transcription service. It's very different than sort of voice, I think, now as we're speaking in terms of AI and natural language understanding. But yeah, I certainly use that. That has gotten a lot better. I remember even 10 years ago, trying to use that, and it was clunky, and I'm not sure if it was even that much more time efficient, because by the time you went through and corrected all the mistakes,
Right.
it may have been better just to go even the old-fashioned route, which is just simply dictate into a recorder, a cassette recorder way back, or
Right.
record and have somebody transcribe it.
Right.
But that technology has gotten better, and I still use that today. But where I'm most excited is about the potential for the future as we get into the AI and the natural language understanding and processing and that sort of thing.
I think one of the interesting things that we heard this morning, when Adam Chire was talking, so he did the whole history of adoption, and then he scored some different areas. He gave like a letter grade to different things that the industry has done well and where it's not doing well. One of the things he said was automated speech recognition, and Dragon Medical, I think they called it, or one of the Dragon versions. That was one of the innovations, that came along, and that got a lot better. And then the people who worked on that went to Alexa and to Google, and everything got even better. So
Right.
I think of that as like the precursor. And I don't know, Nate. I mean, you're close to this. I mean, the ASR is actually pretty good. I think we're having more problem with the NLU side than we are with the ASR.
Yeah, well, Adam certainly highlighted that. In my experience, and I don't have the long history in voice like Adam does, but I remember back in the mid-90s trying Dragon Naturally Speaking on my PC for the first time. And I went through this experience. You go, like Adam described, you have to spend about 20 minutes going through this very rigorous training process. And I remember trying the word jacuzzi. It just could not get that word. It kept coming back with chicken soup and variations of it. And it became sort of a joke in my family.
Were jacuzzis a big part of your life?
It was a big part of my life. I don't know why I had jacuzzi. I just thought, hey, if you can handle jacuzzi, it's very promising. It couldn't at the time. It's very different now. One of the reasons that we got excited about, there are a couple of reasons, many reasons we got excited about voice in healthcare. One of them was just an acknowledgement that ASR, automatic speech recognition, is just that much better.
Yeah, it really is.
And it benefits from the fact that we've got huge data models, courtesy of what Google and Amazon and Apple and Microsoft all have access to as companies, just huge training sets. The performance and speed of computers, ability to crunch those data sets, the machine learning algorithms, AI algorithms, are much faster, so they are able to crunch through the numbers. Cloud-based processing, high-speed networks, all of those have contributed to the ability to create these language models that are way more accurate. And Adam highlighted it. The accuracy is approaching human accuracy, and not just for the real transactional ones, jacuzzi, right?
Right.
I should try that. I haven't tried that in a while. But the continuous speech recognition, the performance, the accuracy, it's really transformed voice, and has created the opportunities that we're all here for.
Okay. All right. So this is when we think about this market. One of the things that we talked about this morning was we like to look at the data, and so Nate, you and I collaborated on a survey a few months ago, and we found that 7.5% of U.S. adults had tried using a voice assistant for some type of use case in the healthcare world, but that over 50% actually want to use them.
Right.
And so tell me your initial impressions of those findings.
Yeah, I was pleased to see 7.5%, honestly.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, single digit, but I was quite impressed and pleased to see that. I think it's very promising, and of course, as you said, that half the people out there are interested in using it to manage their health and wellness. Also very, very promising, and it's consistent with what we see anecdotally and kind of qualitatively with our clients and of course their members and patients as well. The interest is very much there. We tend to work more on the patient-facing side, the patient-facing virtual health assistants, so we're not doing that much on clinician-facing, like transcription, the stuff we talked about a minute ago. But the physicians are also, and the clinicians are also very interested in those virtual assistants that can help them do their job better. Not replace them, but and I'm sure Teri will echo this, clinicians are overworked. There's the fourth aim, the quadruple aim in healthcare. They used to talk about the triple aim, which is quality of care, outcomes, and help me out with this, Teri, there's a third one. quality of care outcomes, patient satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
And the fourth aim in healthcare is clinician satisfaction.
Right.
Helping clinicians just deal with the reality that they're overworked. So anything that that can be offered to the patients to help them self-serve and manage their own wellness while also creating a channel of communication and collecting information and data about that patient so the physicians are informed when they actually do come in for some care is of high value. So what we see, particularly among our provider clients, is the physicians are driving innovation, not just for transcriptions and things like
Right.
that, but for engaging patients, patient-based virtual assistants. So it's really interesting to see that. I mean, back to the survey, very encouraged by it, yeah.
Yeah. So, Teri, I don't feel like you're overworked because you seem to have a lot of extra time
Yeah, he's an
to
exception
do
to the
multiple
rule.
podcasts, flash briefings, blog, personal consultations with people, speaking events. I see you popping up around now. But that aside, what were, you're in Canada too, so
Yeah.
like it's probably a little bit further behind, I would guess.
Correct.
But what are your expectations about just healthcare in general, the Canadian market with those numbers? You think like the people who would want to use it would be about the same amount, or are you not yet there?
I think so, but right now, like you said, we are behind. We're already behind. Just from my experience with covering Alexa, I know that we're 2 years behind. Alexa came into the U.S. about two and a half years ahead of Canada. When I am speaking about voice technology in Canada, a lot of people really don't even know what I'm talking about at this point. But when I start to explain it, people seem to be interested. And when I start to explain how I think it can affect healthcare and make a difference, people get very interested.
So do you think the awareness level is just lower?
I think the awareness level, it's definitely growing. When I look at some of the stats, I think one of the stats I noticed was from Voicebot, and you looked at the penetration rates or how long it took to get 50%. This is actually maybe a year or two old now, but you were looking at the different countries, and Canada had quite a steep slope.
Faster than the U.S.
That's right, and so it was very interesting to me to see that people are interested. I think we're just a little bit behind.
Right, well, it was a full 2 years.
Right,
Maybe,
right, absolutely.
Yeah, it was definitely a full 2 years after the initial. In fact, it was 3 if you count the sort of pre-launch that they did. So, yeah, I mean that made a lot of sense. In fact, Canada and Australia are actually really rapid adopters, and we're seeing the UK is actually accelerating right now. So I think that's definitely interesting. But when you look at the patient-facing activities, like how would you use it as a physician if you could?
So you can break it down into, like you say, the patient-facing activities, which I actually think are going to be most impactful in the home. And then there's the clinician-facing applications, which I think are obviously going to be important in the clinic. In the clinic, along those lines of the discussion that we were having about decreasing burden, what I keep referring to this as the Holy Grail. If some company can get out there and solve this issue of documentation, which is a huge source of it's the tedious work that physicians don't really like to do. You see a patient, that's what we go into it for, is to interact with the patient, develop some rapport, develop a relationship, and be helpful. And then after every interaction, we got to go back and we have to now document and write reports and send for lab tests and all this kind of stuff.
You're actually documenting while you're with the patient.
Yeah.
With your back to the
With your back
patient
to the
most of the
patient.
time.
And that's happening in Canada too, for sure. And so the holy grail in my mind is having a voice assistant in the room, whatever form that takes, listening to the conversation, parsing out the key information, and documenting for me in real time. Mm-hmm. And then my focus can be on the patient and taking care of the patient.
Yeah, and people are working on that. And at HIMSS last year, I think it was Epic, maybe Epic and Nuance, and you have to encourage the listeners to go double check this, but there was this demonstration around an ambient voice assistant in the exam room that would just be listening in on the conversation, not just transcribing, but picking out operative words in the conversation and offering suggestions for dosing and based on not just medical knowledge, but personalized information about the patient at hand. And that, like Teri said, that's the holy grail in facility patient-clinician interfaces. I'll offer another one if I can, around how voice-assistive technology in facility in hospitals actually is on both sides of the coin, patient-facing and clinician-facing. In October last fall, we acquired a technology that we've branded Orbita Assist. It's a bedside assistant solution. And the simplest way to describe it, it's a communication tool for patients who are in a facility, in their hospital room, to communicate with the on-call nurse, to be able to say, I need to use the toilet, I need to a glass of water, or I'm in pain. It's not a replacement, but an alternative or a complement to the red call button.
Right.
Everybody is aware of. The problem with the red call button, as you imagine, is this binary, right?
Right.
Call me, or come see me, or not, right? And there's just no information, there's no context, and there's a real problem in hospital settings of alert fatigue or alarm fatigue that go off, and sometimes it gets to a point where the nurses that are there do not hear it. They just don't hear it, or they, obviously they respond eventually, but the urgency of response is compromised. So the idea here is to provide a little more context, one, so that the patient can actually communicate their need, but also do it through a hands-free, voice-driven interface. And in particular situations like we deployed it in a hospital in Australia where it was a spinal ward. These patients can't move.
Yeah.
So the only way they can really communicate is through their voice in most cases. So for the patient, they have an opportunity to communicate their needs on demand with context. So it's voice first. The clinicians receive an alert that comes to a tablet that they can see the actual request and prioritize and respond accordingly. Result is more efficient response, better patient satisfaction, better nurse satisfaction. But the connection here with the voice side is when the nurse comes in to check in on the patient, they can actually, through their voice, report that they've seen the patient.
Right.
And so the interface is actually ultimately is designed to serve the needs of the patient.
So I didn't know that was part of the workflow.
It isn't quite yet, but that's
Okay,
that's in the works.
okay.
Yeah,
so I was correct then.
You
It's
were
not
right,
part of the workflow.
but it's part of the roadmap, and it's basically been requested. Is that once the nurse comes in,
Yeah, it's brilliant.
they want to be able to use that same device, that same interface, and say, all right, I came in to see the patient, and of course the log gets updated and it gets documented. Not quite the the full vision that Teri was laying out of this ambient virtual assistant, but a step in that right direction around a very particular use case and a very high value use case. So we're excited about that.
It makes me think about the time that I spent in wards, particularly during my training, when you are interacting with the whole medical team. And it's exactly what you say, because every time a nurse goes in, or not, maybe not every single time, but they are responsible, obviously, for documenting and charting the nursing notes as well. So there's a big need for that there. And even just something as simple as medication administration. How many times does a nurse administer a medication to a patient?
Yep.
And can that all be done by voice? As far as logging that.
That's right. And I'm sure it's the case elsewhere, but in the States there are rules and regulations for patients in certain settings where you have to check on their pain threshold, their pain level.
Correct.
I think it's every 2 hours in some cases, and every 2 hours you can say, how's your pain? And you're obligated to record that you made that inquiry.
I see.
And to be able to record that with just your power of your voice is very freeing and empowering for you.
Well, with that solution, in one of the workflow aspects, it is part of that today.
Yep.
I really like is this idea of being able to triage and prioritize.
Yep.
And that's one of the issues you have in that binary world. And the person who's hitting the red button because they need pain relief versus the one who needs a cup of water or a blanket.
No information there.
Right. And they don't know, and they wind up going in the wrong sequence if they don't have that additional information.
Yeah, the simplest example I was given by a nurse was the patient just needs another blanket. They don't know that they need the blanket until they come in and see the patient, and then they have to go back and get the blanket. And it seems mundane, but just that extra trip, you do that 10 times a day, it adds up.
Well, and think about the patient too, right? So they're waiting. They're cold.
Yeah.
It happens in hospitals. We know that. They come in and then they're like,
Oh,
they'll
you
come
need
back.
a blanket? Yeah, I'll come back in 10 minutes.
Exactly, and maybe when they come back, it's all warm because sometimes they warm them up or those
Yeah.
things. But they could just come in and then they give it to you, and everyone's happy. Even if you had to wait behind 2 people who were getting pain medication first, you still get it faster.
Right, and also pushing the red call button, there's no feedback other than the light goes on. You can say, I need a glass of water, or actually, here's the real scenario. The interaction model we developed with Orbita Assist is the patient can say, I'm in pain, which is a high priority question. And the assistant will actually come back, excuse me, and say, I understand you're in pain. Where is your pain? If they say their pain is in their chest, it's very different if and then they say pain is in my small toe on my left foot.
Right.
And of course, it depends on the patient, right? Depending where that pain is.
And there are some patients that may not be able to even use a button for various reasons.
Yep.
Or I think of like a burn ward where it's extremely painful for any movement, movement at all.
That's a good one.
And so being able to use your voice for the most simplest of tasks is it can be, at least for that hospital stay, extremely valuable and have a big impact.
Yeah.
I want to talk about a different use case that Mayo Clinic talked about. And so we'll start with you, Teri, because this sounds like something you would potentially be able to use, where they put a voice assistant in the patient room. Is that what they call it? The
We
discharge
powered
room?
that.
We'll come back to Nate. I'm asking the clinician. Okay?
Nate's powered everything.
Wow.
I'm just trying to get a shout out here.
Good time. So this idea, we all have experienced that. We go, a nurse or an assistant takes us back to the room. They say the doctor will see you in a few minutes. And then there's a smart speaker in the room where they can start asking about their condition or asking questions.
Yeah.
And so when the physician arrives, they already have some of their questions potentially answered, or at least they're primed to do that.
Yeah, and that's brilliant. I get, it depends at what stage of that healthcare journey that patient is. Where I see it extremely valuable is when we're already talking about a diagnosis that we know that this patient has, because then a lot of what we do as physicians is education. So when a patient has a diagnosis, naturally they have questions, and I can't tell you how many times I've answered the same questions.
Right.
And so whatever that is, like as a sports medicine physician, I see tons of, let's think of an example, like an ACL tear of the knee.
Achilles tendonitis.
Achilles tendonitis, very, very common as well. We can talk about that one as well. And so I have my little sort of spiel that I go through, right? When you make a diagnosis and I tell them, and then I can almost predict every question that's going to be asked of me. And so having an assistant that can answer those FAQs, so to speak,
Yes.
is extremely important. The other thing is if you're talking about a diagnosis that has, that's a little more serious or potentially life-threatening, the moment that patient gets that diagnosis, a lot of them, they're still just processing that
Yeah,
information,
they don't ask the
and they
questions.
tune out.
Yeah.
And they either don't ask the questions or they're not even listening to anything else that I say because they're just sort of reeling from this news. Right. And so being able to have a voice system that has some information that's phrased in a way that's very sensitive, empathic, but that they can then sort of review on their own, maybe in the company of their family or their loved ones. I think there's a lot of value in having something like that as well.
So Nate, I understand you worked on a similar project like this.
Well, that project, actually. So I can share some pretty good details on exactly the hypothesis that motivated doing this. Basically, what amounted to a discharge virtual assistant.
Right.
So the idea was that patients who were coming out of outpatient surgery, and it was a dermatological procedure,
Right.
a cancerous lesion, having cancer, just having that diagnosis, as Teri said, is anxiety producing. And when you're coming out of a procedure where even if it was a local anesthetic, it's still surgery, you're not in the most receptive state to be hearing what you should be doing to manage the wound when you go home, answering questions, having the questions in the first place. It's not always top of mind. They're just saying, I just want to get out of here.
Right.
So the old school way would they'd sit down with a discharge nurse, and the discharge nurse would say, or the physician themselves would say, all right, when you go home, you're going to feel the numbness is going to wear off. You're going to feel some pain. You have a prescription for painkiller, et cetera. You'll need to check the wound and make sure it's healing properly. And they'll give them all these instructions. They'll give them a brochure that says all the same thing.
Right.
And the patient, he or she, may not hear a word of it.
Right.
So the idea is to ensure that the patient adheres to their post-care treatment, to offer them that instruction from a human, augmented by a virtual assistant that has that and more encoded like Teri said, an empathetic virtual assistant that can answer those questions and guide them through information. And at their own leisure, so the discharge nurse can leave them with all the information, leave them with a virtual assistant, and then go on his or her very busy schedule. Patient can relax, not feeling the pressure of another busy person trying to tell them what to do, and just ask the questions for as long as they're comfortable staying in that room. And what they found is the nurses loved it because they could feel comfortable that they're leaving the patient with the information and access to more. Patients loved it because they could, at their leisure, without the pressure that they felt with the discharge nurse, ask those questions. And ultimately, the real measure is, are they adhering to their treatment? What's the likelihood that they're going to get readmitted because they didn't? I don't have all those data points, but according to the Mayo, generally the pilot was very positive, and they're actually going forward with another version of that into production.
So Teri, you talked about post-treatment, like in the home. One of the things we hear a lot about is adherence. So whether it's the treatments that Nate was just talking about in terms of wound care, or it's the medication regimen you need to take. We see things out there like Black & Decker has Priya, and Pillow Health has their own direct solution, but that'll dispense medications and really focus on that. So when you think about this treatment of your patients after you've seen them, or maybe before you've seen them, but certainly after you've seen them, how do you think this is going to play out? Is this something we're going to see soon, and what are going to be the really big applications?
Timeline I'm not sure about, but I do think that I think fundamentally the healthcare system is going to change, and we're going to see a lot more access to the healthcare system starting from in the home. Because when these voice assistants are capable of doing the things that we all want them to do, and having medical discussions, and the privacy and the security things are sorted out, however that's going to happen, what I think we're going to see is that each home is actually going to become like a little medical clinic because of the technology. So a patient, I'll tell you what my vision is for the future. I mean, so a patient will wake up in the morning and say they have a sore throat. They'll initiate, or maybe not initiate, maybe the assistant will initiate a discussion, and the assistant,
so a
cough, exactly.
The system
might pick it up, and then we get into the whole issue of vocal biomarkers in terms of what you can detect from someone's bronchial cough might indicate a bronchial infection, and the voice assistant will start asking questions, right? How are you feeling? Sounds like you have a cough. And you start to have that.
You don't look so good.
That's true. Multimodal and
so
cameras.
my wife says.
That's right. When you think about the example, like we do this on a daily basis, right? If somebody's voice sounds different because they're sick, we know.
Right.
There's
you're okay.
Exactly, and there's no reason why the voice with the technology can't do that. So it starts to ask those questions. It starts to figure out with a certain sense of probability what the likely diagnosis is. Maybe it's strep throat, and it says to you, you may have strep throat. We should do a strep throat rapid strep test. Now, depending on which company is selling strep tests, maybe you get one delivered to your home.
Of course, that was the patent that Amazon just had approved in the U.S., which was, it showed the example with someone coughing, and then it recommended cough syrups that they could buy from Amazon. It was really funny.
There you go. So maybe you get this test sent to your home. All of a sudden, you have an IoT-enabled strep test that you take, and your voice assistant guides you through how to do it, how to interpret the results, and yes, you have strep throat. Now you need some medication. Your voice assistant has been living with you for a number of years and knows your medical history, knows what you're allergic to, and perhaps a company has some partnership with a drug company where they can then send you the antibiotics.
I would not have to go and see a doctor?
Potentially, for some things.
For something.
For some things.
Open heart surgery, maybe. The interesting thing about that vision is it's all possible now.
It is.
The technology is there. It's more of a provisioning question, and how do you commercialize it? How do you work within the bounds?
Is it really a provisioning, or is it a regulatory issue?
It's all of those things, right? It's provisioning, it's regulatory, it's the commercial aspects of it. It's a lot of things. But we joke about it, but facial recognition is better than what humans can do. So the ability for an AI to recognize that your face has changed in a way that suggests a particular ailment, and to be able to even potentially come close to diagnosing that ailment, is beyond what most humans can do, certainly our spouses or whatever. And, but the fact that my wife can look at me and say, you're not doing so well, is a start. But the fact that an AI can say, you're not doing so well, and I see something that suggests Bell's palsy, right? A little,
Right. Yeah.
It's a good example.
Yeah, and to be able to suggest something in effectively real time, it's all possible now. With the technology we have. So, it's been interesting seeing. Like, I don't have insight into the timeline. It's really a question of how fast can we get through some of those barriers.
One of the interesting things for me to sort of piggyback on that is, from the Canadian healthcare system, doctors are overworked because because we're very fortunate. There's a lot of great things about the Canadian healthcare system, that it's a public system and everybody can access it. But what that means is that there are tremendous wait lists to get in to see physicians. And one of the ways that I see us lessening that burden is, again, by starting the healthcare journey in the home. So that by talking to the voice assistant, it's not only doing all the things that we just described, but it's also acting as a triage nurse. And then it can act as a tour guide to the healthcare system, right, so that it can then direct the patient to the appropriate location. So, for example, a patient with a cold isn't going to the emergency department because they can't get in to see their family doctor.
Right.
So I think that's going to be very impactful, and it's actually going to decentralize the healthcare system and spread it out amongst the population.
Is that the only way we're going to be able to manage the scale problems that we have today around scalability of healthcare?
I don't know if it's the only way, but I think it's, at least from the things that I've learned over the last couple of years, I think it's perhaps the best way, and it really excites me that we'll be able to do that. The other aspect to that is that the cost of entry to do that with these devices
is so
low. So, for somebody that may not necessarily be able to, and this may be more applicable to the United States, may not be able to afford to access a doctor, but what if they could get some, not all, but some of that healthcare through a device in their home? That's very interesting to me in terms of the socioeconomic factors and that aspect of it.
Well, we had data on that from the survey. It showed actually a higher percentage of low-income adults had accessed a voice assistant for some healthcare questions, and some of it was diagnosis. There was like finding facilities, and so I know that was one of the things that jumped out at you, Nate.
Yeah, it was interesting, and I think extracting out of that, how much of that is sort of a demographic tendency of a younger audience to be using these sort of things. It was quite surprising.
Yeah.
And I think we're kind of still parsing the meaning of that. But
well, I think one of the hypotheses would be that you think of upper income adopting technology faster usually, but technology is so available to people now, and the price points of technology has come down, although smartphones seem to keep going up, everything else keeps coming down, but we have more access, and for someone who's upper income, they have more ready access to healthcare.
Yeah, and they're going to use it, right? I can just go check in on my doctor.
That's right.
I wouldn't even say my dad's not necessarily in that upper income category, but even demographically, he's much more likely to just call his doctor and schedule an appointment than to ask his Google Assistant a question. Although I think that's starting to change as well, even with my octogenarian father. I think one of the things I just want to touch on, that we're talking about voice, but more generally, we're also talking about assistance, or virtual health assistance, and we're starting to even see the acronym VHA come into the vernacular, virtual health assistant.
Right.
And voice is one modality, but virtual health assistant can tap into other technologies, like we talked about facial recognition, biomarkers, and then the interaction, whether it's voice or touch or screen or IoT device input, connected weight scale. They're all part of the same overall kind of experience, a virtual health assistant.
I was just going to add on to that. It kind of gets back to this vision of having your own little clinic in your home, because these devices that are monitoring you and collecting data, and somehow, some way, I hope that they all feed back to a central place where you really have your own health profile, the patient's in control of that, and then depending on when or if they need to access the healthcare system, that all of that data that's been being collected through the voice assistant, through all these other devices that you just mentioned, Nate, can be used much more effectively by the physician or the other healthcare provider.
It would be nice if health records were actually owned by the patient and not the provider.
Right.
That would be amazing. Probably not going to happen because of regulatory and lobbying issues, but that would be a wonderful thing. So you just mentioned multimodal, Nate. You've been talking, Teri, you've been talking about people using outside the home. One of the other things we found in that survey was that it was 52%. It's almost exactly the same amount of people who want to use a voice assistant for healthcare want to also use it on a smartphone. So we talk a lot about these devices. In fact, most of our conversation so far has been about these IoT devices, smart speakers, or other types of custom devices. But most people, their expectation is they should be able to do this on their phone. So we'll start with you, Nate. I mean, what do you think about that expectation and how people maybe in the voice industry should be thinking about healthcare and voice beyond the smart speaker?
Well, I can tell you that among our clients and partners, more than half of them are doing a chatbot or voice and multimodal chatbot delivered on smartphones. Part of it is just a reflection of how many devices are out there that are in that form factor.
Right.
So it makes sense. And I think we need to treat it like any other endpoint and make sure that they're optimized to handle the modality of voice and the other ones as well, of course. The main blocking issue is the microphone. You can't easily interact with your smartphone from the other side of the room. And the example I've been giving for a couple of years now was this vision impaired gentleman I work with who had a smartphone with Siri on, and he could say, here's Siri to engage it, but if he was more than 10 feet away, it didn't work. So giving him an Alexa power device was transformative. But that's really the only difference is, the microphones can be accessed from distance and with efficacy.
So I don't know in your grand vision, Teri, if the smartphone was really, because you were talking more about the IoT devices, because is it because you think about healthcare being in the clinic or at home, or am I misinterpreting it?
No, because I think this gets back to sort of a fundamental shift that we're seeing, over the course of different types of operating systems. MS-DOS, MS Windows, iOS, meaning mobile, with a phone, and now voice being the most natural one. And so that's why I think that I agree with Nate. There's so many phones out there. I think that's sort of the natural progression that we're going to see, the chatbots and that sort of thing on the phone. But ultimately, it's being free of that screen and just being able to have the discussion that's key. So when I say IoT devices, if there's a thermometer or a blood pressure cuff or something that you need to grab one of those vital signs that you need to determine what your health status is, I see that being connected to your personal healthcare data, but ultimately driven, or any interaction that you have with that is tapped into a voice type of device so that you're speaking as opposed to having to enter it in your mobile phone.
Well, I think of a lot of the health and fitness activity tracking that we see out there winds up in the phone. And in fact, for a lot of people, the data from their health and fitness activity from their smartwatches or other type of devices might actually be more robust than their actual medical records that they've been accumulating over decades of life. And so, I wonder if this idea of what we call about in the Alexa world skill-to-skill connections, or Adam was talking about this idea of integrating across different types of capabilities, whether that's going to bring us back to the smartphone more, because there's a lot of people who sort of fall off of the activity tracking after a certain amount of time. But part of it's like, okay, now I sort of know what it is, like what's the use of continuing to collect it? But if I had that all, and then a voice assistant would recognize it and they could integrate into my other data, and then they could actually do maybe a more precise diagnosis.
So when I've been talking a lot about voice assistants, but it's not, and we've heard this in the conference many times, it's not voice only, right? It's voice and or multimodal. So when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about having the ability to speak to the device, but also being able to see a graphical output of what your heart rate variability is or how many steps you've taken and that sort of thing. So in order to, there are good applications for voice, and there are better applications for, in some cases, visual display.
Right.
What is that visual display? Well, if you're out and about, then maybe your phone still is the best visual display, because you're not at home where you have your multimodal voice assistant sitting there. So I think it depends on where you are and what you're doing. Ultimately, I think it's driven by voice, but the graphical display is going to be very important as well.
Yeah, I think in the end, it come back to this idea of the virtual assistant that has many potential endpoints and interfaces. I won't say it follows you around, but when you're interacting with it through, you're walking down the street, your access point might be your mobile phone. When you get in your car, it's the physical interface in your car. When you're in the comfort of your home, it might be a smart speaker.
So device independent.
Device independent, but the same virtual assistant ultimately able to follow you around. I am sure there's a sci-fi movie where this is represented, but there, with the idea of a virtual assistant with whatever avatar or proxy interface is represented there, the modality controlled by the location you're in, right? When you're in a car, it's more likely to be voice. When you're walking down the street, it can be voice and touch, but even voice better there because you're trying to put your feet in front of each other. But when you're in your bed, it make it just be voice or screen or whatever. So I think we don't want to get too parochial about how we think about which device is the right one. The ideal would be to have, as Adam said this morning, flexibility to have it run across any device.
So Orbita's been in this space, the new voice assistant space.
Yeah.
Like we think about starting around 2015 or so. You were early in voice assistants in general, and you were one of the first companies to actually have a vertical focus. And you focused right on healthcare.
Yeah.
So you've had an opportunity to have these conversations. We're Project Voice now, a few years into this. How are the discussions, the questions different today than they were 2 years ago?
So I would say 2 years ago, and we've been at this really commercially for about 3 years.
Right.
Actually, the backstory is we really launched at HIMSS in 2017, so not even 3 years.
Okay.
It was in the spring of 2017. So
But it's like 3 weeks from now, so it's close.
I know, right? But even that 3 years, it seems like a lifetime.
Yeah.
It just seems like we've been doing this forever. But 3 years, blink of the eye, right? But to get to the question, what we've seen change is that the initial forays of voice in healthcare were really more on the consumer side. The Mayo first aid skill. Can we put up a question answering skill or just answer questions? There was some interest at that time, and certainly there's always been interest in the transcription problem, but for patient facing, taking advantage of these next generation devices from Amazon and Google was really what can we do to tap into the consumer wave and build a healthcare experience that would be for health and wellness question answering. So that was, call that phase one. Phase two started to kind of cross over into more clinical scenarios where it's can we voice enable experiences for patients in their home. You mentioned Pillow and LifePod and other companies and some of our partners who are trying to do that, create remote patient care and or pop health solutions in the home. Now we're starting to see clinical use cases, the Orbita Assist example that I gave earlier. So they kind of follow that progression. And as we move in that direction, awareness of privacy and security, not just HIPAA and other regulations, but the facilities themselves have very strict requirements that go well beyond HIPAA. In some cases where they'll say you cannot put a commercial Amazon device in a hospital at all.
Right.
In extreme cases, and there's a spectrum of that. But that's the kind of journey that we're going through, consumer to in-home and now into clinical.
One thing that strikes me about 2 years ago is I think we would have heard the term IBM Watson.
Yep.
I don't think I've heard it once this week.
Yeah, I haven't either. We've had at least a couple customers who were in the IBM Watson camp and are no longer. And we're working with them.
I think they owned the mind share around voice in that space. Now, I think there's this whole other thing about virtual advisor versus virtual assistant and what's working, and they've had their own challenges around scalability, but it just goes to show that things are evolving pretty quickly.
Oh, for sure. Like we said, it's been 3 years for us, and we haven't, just anecdotally, we just haven't done that much work with Watson, and we've seen some organizations choose different paths. I think the technology from IBM is very compelling and very strong. It's more of a, how do you get this very powerful AI-based technology into these very relatively slow-moving and conservative organizations? And we experience this ourselves. We typically have come into some of these bigger organizations, particularly 2.5, 3 years ago, through the innovation groups, not through lines of businesses or particular clinical departments. That's changing. But voice 2 years ago, very innovative, and people were just trying to figure it out. So in many ways, IBM may have suffered from being almost too early.
Probably, yeah. And some of the use cases they were tackling were quite complex.
Ambitious.
Yeah, they weren't necessarily just the engagement. They were around diagnosis and
Yeah, very ambitious.
And there's a lot more risk and all these other types of things. So Teri, you've been doing this for a while too. And you and I met, I think, well, we'd already talked by Skype or something before that, but we actually met in Boston at the Voice of Healthcare.
Right.
And so I just think about your presentation there, which was sort of an excellent eye-opening presentation, I think, for a lot of the people at that Harvard Medical School event. How are you talking about the space differently now?
Yeah, excuse me. Similar to what Nate described in terms of the putting it in the home and moving into different domains. And I know Nate has spoke about it in this regard as well, but I see that initially, and we can do this right now, is using the devices as providing information. So educating the patient. There's no regulation required for that, as long as it's, you want good data and that, giving evidence-based, have it coming from a reputable source. But you can do that now, and a good example is flash briefings, right? So you can have a flash briefing about diabetes, and it's a great way to give a diabetes tip on a daily basis. You can do that right now, and that's being developed, or there are flash briefings out there. I think the next step is having the assistant be a little bit of a guide. We've touched on this a little bit. So guiding you through what is the appropriate plan if you have diabetes. So what do you kind of need to do on a daily basis? So we're getting a little bit more personal, but we're not necessarily capturing any PHI at that point. The next step up from there is, then you're getting into potentially suggesting or pulling out that triage aspect based on discussions that you're going to have. Now all of a sudden you're collecting data on the person, so that puts you in a whole different category of regulation. And then beyond that, then you get into, could it make a diagnosis? And finally, can it actually start to treat you at home? And I think that's the sort of continuum that we're going to be seeing. Right now we're at stage 1, stage 2, maybe moving into sort of that stage 3, very early days. But that's sort of how I'm talking about it. And those are the sort of pillars, if you will, of where I see things going.
That's great. And I think that's a great way for us to wrap up today. I appreciate you both taking so much time today. So Dr. Teri Fisher, tell the listeners how they can learn more about what you're doing, the many things you're doing, despite the fact that you're overworked in the Canadian healthcare system.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the podcast. You've had some wonderful guests, and it's great to be here to spend some time with both of you. So relevant to our discussion here, Voice First Health is my blog and my podcast. I did recently just launch a flash briefing series, just as I was talking about, under that Voice First Health brand, and we're going to develop that out and tackle those different diseases or illnesses so people can get their daily tips. And if you are interested in learning more about sort of my take on general voice technology and Alexa stuff, Alexa in Canada and Voice in Canada flash briefing. Too many things for me to keep track of.
The portfolio is becoming overwhelming.
And I'm very active on Twitter. My handle is Dr. Teri Fisher, DrTerifisher.
Yeah, I recommend people check that out and follow Teri. Nate.
Also, I'll say thank you and to Bret for the opportunity, and congratulations to both of you guys for all the accolades you've received and the great work you've done.
And you too.
Well, you guys are out there, and we, I would say we sometimes ride the coattail of your great media presence. So, congratulations on that. So you can learn more about Orbita by going, obviously, to our website at orbita.ai. You'll also find us on Twitter, where we're mostly retweeting things from Bret and Teri here because they write such great stuff. We're on LinkedIn as well, and there's a number of resources on our website, webinars we've done with our partners on use cases in healthcare, and some ebooks, so check it out.
If I may, I just want to highlight, Nate, as well. We have, speaking of books, we have the first book, Voice Technology in Healthcare, which is coming out, HIMSS 2020. I'm co-authoring it with David Metcalf, Sandhya Pruthi, Harry Pappas, and we have over 30 contributors to that book, including Nate, who's written the chapter on privacy security. So I'm really excited about that, and there's lots of information about that on my website as well.
Excellent. All right, Voicebot listeners, thank you for listening all the way to the end. I'm Bret Kinsella, your host. You can find me on the Twitter at Bret Kinsella. As always, read voicebot.ai. And thank you to the organizers of Project Voice, Bradley Metrock and team, for bringing so many great people together this week. And so we're able to sit down and have these conversations. I know you learned a lot about healthcare today. I learn from these guys every day, every time I talk to them. So thanks a lot for both of you, and I look forward to catching up with you very soon at the next conference.
Wonderful, thanks. Hey YouTubers, if you liked what you just saw, then feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and don't be afraid to speak up.
Okay.
All right, it's a wrap.
That was good.
Yeah.
That's great.
It was like,
I was fighting a
and you were the
cough.
only one, you guys were the only ones coughing?
I was fighting about that for the last 10 minutes. I was like,
Well, you know, the funny thing is, I don't remember when we did that. It was like November or something.
Yeah,
we did
it's a
that
while
thing.
ago.
And like, okay, fine. I messed that up. But it was, I finally got better about a month later.
yeah, you weren't the only one. I had some of my colleagues, they were out for a couple of weeks.
Oh, wow.
Well, I was never out.
But,
That was
You just went powered through.
down but not out.
I had it for like 8 weeks.
Oh, wow.
I went through two rounds of antibiotics.
Wow.
And because it progressed as they normally do.
Yeah.
But of course, like I was at CES last week, like, and then I'm here, and I'm just
Starting to
Uh-oh.
And every 2 years, I get something like that.
Yeah.
It's usually, but I've never gotten it twice in a season.
Yeah. Vitamin D. Right, Terry?
Vitamin D.
Vitamin C.
And D.
See,
D because
and D,
you don't
light.
You need sunlight, and we don't get enough of it. So,
I'm out a long time in the woods, so
what's that?
I'm out in the woods a lot.
Are you?
Yeah, well, I know it's like they say you can't get enough, but I get the high quality stuff. Yeah, I
You're
do.
probably
like,
more than the average person.
Yeah, I mean, I do like 4-hour runs.
Everybody's vitamin D deficient, though.
4-hour runs?
Yeah.
Did you know this?
You should talk
He's
to
an
my, you should talk to my, you should talk to my wife. My wife has done the Ironman 3 times.
Okay, yeah, I do.
Yeah,
I'm an
have you done?
runner.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
You guys, you know what I do? I build guitars.
Do you really?
Really?
Yeah.
You build them, like acoustic, electric? Huh.
Wow,
How'd you
that's
learn
cool.
You do one, and you make
That's how you
many,
learn.
many mistakes.
It sounds like teaching surgeons.
Yeah, that's
true,
the wrong place to cut. And I've done that with my guitar. No, I haven't done too many of them, but it's not quite as extreme as running for 4 hours in the woods.
Yeah, it's just like
What's the longest run you've done?
35 hours.
Wow.
Okay. What's the
30.
mileage of
That was
that?
100 miles, but it was in the mountains.
100-mile run.
Yeah, it was 25 or 8,000 meters climbing.
When was that? How long ago was that?
That was in October.
Just this past October.
Yeah.
And then
Holy.
right after that, you came down with, I don't know, I'm just pointing out there may be some,
Causation, I'm not
Yeah.
sure, but
Help me out
You
here.
are
correlation.
susceptible after doing those extreme.
yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, you are susceptible.
It knocks you down, but
Yeah, it was probably more that I finished that on Sunday morning, and on Wednesday I flew to Munich. I mean, it was Tuesday.
yeah, so you're exposed to
it
some
might
new
have been
bugs.
Tuesday. I think it was Tuesday.
Like
or
immune
something
system
like that.
down.
And so like I'm on a plane, I'm
Lower immune
you know,
system.
and that one starts on a Friday night. So you run through the
Lord.
night, and then I was slower than I'd planned, so I wound up running through a second night, basically.
No
So you
kidding.
don't sleep for 2 days. But like some of those races are they're very fun.
I'm sure they are.
Wow.
I used to do some mountaineering, and some friends of mine invited me to do this thing called the J Peak thing
Okay.
in Vermont. Have you ever heard of this?
Well,
It's
Jay
a-
Peak, they ski there.
Well, it's in that area. It's in the summertime.
Uh-huh.
It's a triathlon, but it is trail running, and I think it's a trail run marathon, and then a kayak.
Oh, yeah, so
And
it's
I
like an
don't-
adventure race.
Yeah,
type of
and
thing,
then
yeah.
what's the third? Oh, mountain biking. So kayak, mountain biking, trail
Yeah,
run.
that's fun.
And it's 24 hours.
And did you do it?
No, but I had a couple of friends who did it.
Yeah.
They haven't done it again.
Yeah,
So
well,
it's
sometimes
brutal.
you do them once, sometimes you do them, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
brutal.
They had one in Vermont about a year and a half ago that I thought was kind of interesting. It was, they called it 29029. 29029, is that right? It was like basically climb Everest, and it was at one of the ski resorts. It might have been
Stowe, Killington.
Killington. I think it was Killington. But I think you had to do 17 up to get to the 20. You go from
17 times.
17 times, and
Up
then
and
they
down.
had
Oh,
the
I see.
gondola running, so you could actually ride it down, which is key because you would just
Down is
destroy
worse.
your
Yeah.
quads
Oh, yeah, can't go
doing
down.
that. That would, well, you
Yeah.
could, but
Quads and knees.
so one guy did it twice. The guy who won, he did it twice, but you had like
What does that
36
mean?
hours.
Twice. He went up and
He
down
did
34 times?
Yeah,
He went up 34 times.
he went up 34 times, took it down a minute. So, yeah, so there's all sorts of things out there for people to do.
All sorts of crazy people.
Yeah.
And it keeps you in business.
That, yeah, if it weren't for people like you, I'd be out of a job. Yeah.
Well, thanks
It's good.
again.
Yeah, thanks very much, Brett.
Good.
It's fun.
Thank you. I think we're going to do this in like, when is HIMSS, by the way?
Early March.
Is it the 13th or 7th? 7th through the 13th of March?
I can tell you.
I think this is going to come.
Are you going?
No.
No, you're going to be there.
I'll be there.
I avoid HIMSS. I've been to HIMSS.
March 9th.
I have scars on, oh, it's not till March.
March 9th, 10th, 11th,
How was
12th.
CES?
It was different this year. It was really nice to have, like, Pete ran that session.
Yeah.
It's just like a totally different vibe, like having that day where it's just like people from the industry, and then having Google be so engaged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I've had slightly different experience than most people with Google because like they want to talk to us, and so they have like media events and things like that. But like have them so engaged,
Yeah.
it just is amazing. Well, you don't have to do that.
No, it's fine. Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, so I thought that was good. Their innovation, not much.
No.
No, it was like
What was the turnout for pizza then?
a couple hundred. So it was some good content though, and it was interesting because like there's a lot of people in the voice industry who go to CES,
Right.
but you never see them.
Oh, 'cause they're all
over the
spread out.
place. Yeah.
Right.
And so like you run into them kind of randomly. 2 years ago, a year ago I guess it was, 2 CSs ago, Bradley and I organized a meetup. So 30 of us showed up at this one bar. So that was good, but this was even better because it was like having a community, and then like, you know, you can go to the show floor the day before or the day after or something like that. So it was a nice structure for a lot of people.
Yeah.
That's good.
Have you been to CES?
I've actually never been to CES.
It is wild. 180,000 people.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's like 4 times as big as HIMSS almost.
Oh, yeah.
It works. I mean, this is an interesting event, so it's fun to come out here.
Yeah, I like coming to Chattanooga. I think you nailed
That's
it
good.
this morning. You know, there's just a certain charm to come to this place, and
Yeah, right. Well, you think about like these famous conferences like Sun Valley. You know, they do
Yeah.
get you out.
Right.
They become famous
Because of the
that.
con-
Right.
Now, there's some that are just big and they're media events and all these other things,
Yeah.
and they're in New York or San Francisco. but-
Sun Valley, Davos, Chattanooga.
You gotta go on the tour.
Everybody's talking
You gotta
about
get.
And now the mayor of Chattanooga is going to be using that clip.
Davos, Sun Valley,
Oh man,
Chattanooga.
He should have been Mike.
be there.